Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
All right. My name is Alfredo Garcia Garza. I'm a PhD candidate in the Committee of the Study of Religion here at Harvard University. It's my 7th year, close to graduate, hopefully. And my research, part of my research focuses on the medicinal and ritual legacy of Fidencio Cintra Constantino, also known as El Niño Fidencio, in the Rio Bravo or Rio Grande borderlands, Texas-Mexico area. So for this panel, we have 4 different presentations, and one of the presenters is going to be joining us virtually, 2 of them. So we may need a little bit of time for the transitions. The name of the panels is Indigenous Plant Medicine Traditions in the Americas. And the first presenter is Andrea Sánchez-Castañeda and Nicolle Torres Sierra. Let me see. Andrea is a postdoctoral fellow in the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard Divinity School. And Nicolle belongs to Cabilda Indígena Muysca de Suba, a graduate student in linguistics at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia. And the title of the presentation is Re-Existence in the Ancestral and the Inherited, Sacred Plant Medicine and Urban Muysca Indigenous Revitalization. Thank you.
Sua Chocahuenua, Suba Inga Gis, Massachusetts, Kika Hasqua Sipqua, Che Pique, Achuemague, Shehika, Andrea Sanchez, Gue Inga Sha Meketa Gue. Today is a good day. Greetings to the indigenous territories of Suba and the territory of Massachusetts, in which I would like to ask for permission. We are happy to be here. My name is Andrea Sánchez-Castañeda. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for the Study of World Religions. And today, with my friend and colleague, Nicolle, we're gonna be presenting our project. Unfortunately, she's now she's not able to join us today in person because of her visa, but she's presenting from the land of Suba in Bogota, Colombia, and she wants me to say in advance that she's learning English, so apologies for any mispronunciations. So please, Nicolle, introduce yourself.
Can you listen to me?
Yes.
Perfect. Asho Mekwane, Umkuka, Massachusetts, and Chinga, Bocha Hasquasikwa. Chohuka Nicolle Guamuska Fucha Suascoca Chagwane. Sina Shepuku Ashwenin Quaka, Shibochanga Shepuku Bosha Shekuka, Muska Mostesuka. Well, first I want to greeting you. I hope this message in my native language finds you all very well. I want to greet your land, the elder spirits and the ancestors that dwell there, asking for permission to speak about my people in your territory. My name is Nicolle. I'm an indigenous woman from the Muysca people of Suba, and I'm very happy to be able to speak with you. To start, let's get to know who the Muysca people are. The Muysca people are the original people of Bogota, Colombia. During the Spanish colonization, we, the Muysca, live in cities like Bogota and Tunja until the mestizo population became dominant. The establishment of pueblos de indios, or Indian towns, forced labor in encomiendas, epidemics, the suppression of indigenous beliefs, and the introduction of livestock in 1544 greatly transformed the Muysca landscape and economy. These events impose a colonial mindset that altered our social organization and disrupted our connection with the land. In the 19th century, during the Republic period, the privatization of resguardos, or indigenous reservations, led to the removal of the Muyscal's legal indigenous status. This resulted in land dispossession and the erosion of our native identity. However, the revival of Muysca identity in the 20th century, marked by the creation of the Cabildo Indígena Muysca de Suba in 1981, represents a reconnection with memory and territory. This resurgence challenges centuries of exclusion and land exploitation, calling for a reassessment of historical narratives. For us, the Muysca of Suba, threats like urbanization, deforestation, and water contamination endanger our sacred sites. Through cultural revitalization projects, the Cabildo Indígena Muysca de Suba works to restore ancestral tradition in cuisine, language, weaving, music, agriculture, and medicine, preserving Muysca heritage and empower our sense of belonging and resistance in our native land, Bogota.
In the Americas, although anthropology has shown significant interest in studying sacred plant medicine among indigenous communities, this focus has primarily been on Amazonian practices. As a result, the use of plant medicine by indigenous peoples in urbanized landscapes has been largely overlooked. This project explores the traditional and sacred use of plant medicine among the Muysca. We explore the relationship between Muysca medicinal knowledge, body territory, and urban coloniality, focusing on the interconnectedness of the Muysca body, sacred plants, and the land of Suba. Indigenous scholar Lorena Cabnal, for instance, introduced the concept of cuerpo territorio, or body territory, which emphasizes that the body and the land are not separate but deeply interdependent. Urbanization and environmental degradation have harmed both, with sacred sites polluted and cultural practices disrupted, negatively impacting the health of the Muysca community. Building on the colonial scholars, we extend the concept of coloniality of nature to urban settings, showing that the racialization of space continues to displace and marginalize indigenous knowledge and practices. This perspective challenged the erasure of indigenous culture in urban spaces, offering the Cuerpo Territorio framework as a decolonial tool for rethinking how urban development narratives and practices continue to marginalize worldviews, subjectivities, and human and non-human relationships of urban indigenous communities. This paper stems from an ongoing collaborative research project using participatory action research as primary methodology. Together with Nicolle, we conducted interviews with elders and chaitas, which are medicinal medicine women and men, and initiated the Sacred Medicine Photo Voice project in collaboration with the community's communication group. This visual methodology, which involves several Muysca members, focused on self-representations of the Muysca people's relationship with plants and sacred medicine. Nicolle?
The community of Suba has developed multiple initiatives around cultural revitalization, a fundamental axis for our survival within our 50-year Plan de Vida or life plan. Cultural revitalization, understood as a set of pedagogical and research actions, has materialized in various projects, especially in the recovering knowledge related to traditional medicine and agriculture. In this process, the use of medicinal and sacred plants occupies a central place, not only as part of the healing practice, but also as an intrinsic element of the spiritual and cultural relationship we have with the territory. The revitalization of plant medicine does not simply aim to rescue past practices, but also to make visible those practices that, although hidden, remain alive in the community. These practices are preserved in the memory and everyday of the elders, who, despite the territorial and cultural transformation of Suba, continue to defend their knowledge against Western biomedicine. An example of this is the ontological relationship between the Muysca and plants, which manifests the community's understanding of plants as living beings with a spirit, requiring care and respect. Within this worldview, there are certain rituals or protocols of interactions such as avoiding getting close to plants during menstruation, asking for permission when harvesting, not pulling them out with anger to prevent them from drying out, and establishing constant communication with them while watering them, collecting them, or activating them in ritual contexts. In this sense, the preparation of infusions, oils, poultices, juices, syrups, drops, or ointments requires not only knowledge of their properties, but also the use of words and the spiritual knowledge of the plant, where healers, traditional doctors, or apprentices ask for the plant's permission to ensure the effectiveness of its use. Another key dimension of the revitalization of sacred plant medicine lies in agriculture, a practice that has undergone drastic transformation over more than 480 years of colonization. The arrival of the city altered agricultural dynamics, displacing traditional gardens that, in many cases, were sold due to rising land taxes and urban expansion. Despite the loss of cultivable land, the community has found forms of resistance through urban agriculture.
In this context, Chaita and Elder Ignacio Mususu Neuque emphasize the importance of gardens as source of self-sustenance for the community. He says, the gardens in the territory are important because here we use many plants, and we have to buy them and bring them from other territories. But we can plant them here ourselves. The seeds and plants will grow with the intention of the Muysca territory. Likewise, Chaita Miriam Trivino, who's one of the Muysca midwives, asserted that the gardens are fundamental to us as the Muysca community because in the gardens we plant our own medicinal plants. We grow our own food. Preserving the gardens help us to ensure the survival of these seeds and plants, which are essential for life, both for nourishment and for medicinal purposes.
Far from being knowledge learned from external models, these practices emerge as a response to the imposition of the city. In courtyards, rooftops, and front gardens, especially the Muysca grandmothers, has passed down the land and seeds from generation to generation. Now, cultivating them in flower pots, oil pots, barrels, buckets, and other recycled containers. Paradoxically, the waste generated by urbanization and modernity has been transformed into tools of survival, allowing medicinal plants and some edible species to not disappear under the concrete, but to continue resisting in the domestic spaces of the community. In these containers, the indigenous grandmothers have preserved the botanical memory of our territory, ensuring that sacred plants remain alive in our lands.
Another side of cultural revival is the Santuario Mountain. In 2018, the community reclaimed this sacred mountain, marking as their first direct territorial appropriation since the founding of the Cabildo, which is the Indigenous Council. Despite the land's private ownership and urban development permits, the community with the Cabildo support occupied to build a kusmui, or ceremonial house, and a fuechi, a fireplace that can be seen both in the picture, and food and medicinal gardens. Since then, the Santuario has hosted numerous rituals, political gatherings, educational events, placenta burials, funerals, intercultural meetings, and communal farming. The community also holds something called trasnochos, which are overnight reflection sessions incorporating sacred medicine. Chaita Miriam highlights that the site's spiritual importance, particularly through placenta planting ceremonies. She says, we hold placenta planting ceremonies in this territory. We plant them in the santuario as a symbol of rooting, of how I root myself to Mother Earth and to this land. Additionally, we work with the umbilical cords of the children to help them in the process of rooting themselves in the territory. We also spoke with one of the medicine men in the community, and he reflects on how these plants have become relatives. He says, the difference between us, indigenous peoples, and other peasants lie in the type of relationship we have with plants. As indigenous person shares an intimate relationship with these plants. For us, plants are people. But to build these relationships, you must unlearn what it means to communicate, understand, and resonate with the territory in different terms. But how do we do that? Through the relationship with spiritual plants. Spiritual plants awaken this vibration. The traditional use of tobacco and its derivatives, including ambira, hosca, and rapé, as well as coca in both of its leaf and form and as a mambe, along with the tihiki, or the brugmansia tree, and other medicinal plants has been a vital component in the Muysca revitalization process and the strengthening of political efforts aimed at defending and reclaiming the land in the city. During the interviews, both the elders and the chaitas divide the plants into two categories, plantas de poder, or plants of power, and other medicinal plants. Plants of power are those such as tobacco, coca, and brugmansia, which are highly revered in the medicinal practices of the chaitas. These plants are considered living entities with spirit and agency, working alongside the chaita to either harmonize people or spaces, or to open or share the word, an act that involves opening space to share knowledge, initiate an important conversation, or even bring messages. As Elder Ignacio shared, when government authorities from the Ministry of Environment were scheduled to visit the Santuario mountain, the elders prepared days in advance and used tobacco as a messenger to announce the encounter. The tobacco helped bring spiritual and earthly beings to accompany the community in this political meeting. In recounting the experience, he explained that the way the tobacco was burning allowed him to foresee a positive outcome for the political meeting, saying, I saw the elder sitting, reading a big book. He was sitting in the santuario, and when I saw the elder, I knew that we were going to have good news. Other spiritual plants, such as coca, in the form of mambe, has been revitalized as medicinal plant within the community. For the medicine man Jason Jopasa, mambe serves as a vessel of intergenerational knowledge that revitalizes the essence for the Muysca people. Using mambe, the Muysca healer embodies the plant's personhood, but most importantly, the healers are infused with the knowledge of their ancestors about the territory. As Jason states, the mambe carries the wisdom of the elders who have walked the territory. So we make medicine to find the spirit, the words of the elders, and the feeling of the Mother Earth. This medicine awakes in us the knowledge that exists and is stored within. The same way, Chaita Miriam, who's in the video, also signaled how other plants of power from other territories allow them to revitalize their own medicinal practice. She says, for the awakening of the traditional medicine of the Muysca people, many of us had to take medicines from other peoples, from other territories. So personally, I tried the jopo from the Amazon, but I also took jahe. And yes, we start using other medicines in one way or another, open our own path, both personal and communal, so we could connect and find the essence of what our medicines truly are. For both chaitas and the elders we spoke with during this project, plants of power are reserved exclusively for the use of men and medicine men or women. These plants are used to prepare themselves before assisting patients, to harmonize communal gatherings, and in specific and rare cases, to share with patients, community members, or even outsiders seeking medical assistance. Additionally, all of them emphasize how their experience as caminantes de la medicina, or medicine walkers, was shaped by the transmission of knowledge from their grandparents, who were once medicine men or women, or through the teachings of community elders. They highlighted the importance of lineage and the preservation of knowledge. Other medicinal plants are not only used in their healing practices, but according to our research, are also commonly used by elders and the broader community daily. The plants that we revise in our research that are most frequently are stinging nettle, calendula, rosemary, elderflower, arboloco, arrayan, cedro nogal, and as you can see, cannabis. Among others, and among other medicinal plants. While some of these plants are not native to Suwa territory, they have been integrated as a result of colonization. These plants are not considered active, and they are shared within the community, and there's no distinction between them. They all have become allies. To conclude, by revitalizing Muysca medicine and plant knowledge, the Chaitas and the elders maintain a profound connection to the territory of Suwa in Bogotá, Colombia, which includes not only the non-human plants, animals, fungi, and minerals, but also the spiritual realm. Additionally, as is seen in the case of the Santuario, by resisting the urban development of these lands, the Muysca contribute to the protection of ecosystems that are crucial for the survival of endangered endemic species of fauna and flora in the city.
This project has demonstrated that sacred indigenous plant medicine is also present in urban landscapes, while technologies of dispossession make it increasingly difficult for communities to cultivate their own edible and medicinal plants. As shown here, indigenous peoples find ways to either reclaim urban spaces for established alternative forms of urban agriculture. We hope this work inspires ethical and collaborative research with indigenous communities worldwide to gather, preserve, and produce knowledge that not only highlights the complexity of plant medicine, but also addresses the political, cultural, and territorial needs of these, our communities. Ikwa wake.
Thank you, relatives.
Thank you, Andrea and Nicolle, for the wonderful presentation. For our next presentation, we have three presenters. The presentation is called The Peyote Road, Uncovering the History of a Sacred Journey. Reanna Daniels is a member of the Native American Church of Canada and a PhD candidate at the University of Saskatchewan. Kelly Daniels belongs to the Sturgeon Lake First Nation, and Erika Dyck Professor and Canada Research Chair in the History of Health and Social Justice at the University of Saskatchewan.
We're going to try to do this in 20 minutes seamlessly with no concerns about time, right? We've got an hour? I'm just kidding. Awesome. Thank you. As Alfredo mentioned, I'm Erika Dyck, and I'm here with my friends, teachers, and collaborators, Kelly Daniels and Reanna Daniels. And we've started working together over a few years, and some of you I've met in the past. I've been working on the history of psychedelics for about 25 years, but it's really through this relationship and through the connections with the community that I feel like I have an opportunity, really the privilege to start over again and to think about the way that peyote has been understood in Canada from a very different mindset, from a very different worldview, one that I am just beginning to learn. So I'm going to speak for only a few minutes and then pass the podium here to my colleagues who have much more to say on this. One of the things that we started doing, the way we met, I was seeking permission to use a photograph that I found in the archives and was put in touch with Kelly, who said, not in this particular image, but this is a different image from the archives. He said, "That's my grandmother," the woman sitting in the middle. And from there, our relationship and ultimately a project has evolved out of a conversation about the unnamed people in the photographs and, of course, the unnamed and underrepresented worldviews that exist within the archival trail, particularly in our project at least, about peyote in Canada. And some of you may know that we left home, it was minus 40 something, so it's not that cold here. Peyote cactuses don't grow there. And so part of this started with a simple question about how is it that there is a rich and vibrant cultural connection with peyote medicines in Canada in a place that seems, at least at first blush, like an obvious place where this might be newly imported or something that has been borrowed from another place. And it's through the teachings that I've been learning from Kelly and Reanna and elders in the community that this is simply a misunderstood way of understanding that relationship. And so I'll just quickly acknowledge, again, I grabbed these screenshots from the archives. This is from, a few weeks ago, where you can see that people are still not named. That's one of our projects going forward. This is an image of Frank Takesgun, who was the president of the Native American Church of North America, who visited Kelly's family in Saskatchewan. Here he is again. And there are other members of the community. Now, the archival record isn't completely blank. These are cobbled together off of microfilm. But there was a moment where these ceremonies not only were an important part of an indigenous history, but also started to fuse with the concept of psychedelics. Some of you may know that the word psychedelic was forged in that snow-swept prairie region of Saskatchewan, and some of the members, including Humphrey Osmond, who coined the word psychedelic, attended a ceremony where Kelly's grandparents were in attendance as well, and began to write quite passionately and testify to the federal government about the need to keep these ceremonies sacred and the need to learn from them on their own terms. Some of that fell on deaf ears, but you may have heard of the concept of set and setting. He started taking notes after this ceremony in 1956 and said, we need to think about the way that the drums and the music and the setting and the preparation and the integration is part of our clinical enterprise. I only have 5 minutes. He wrote to the police, to the Indian agents, to the Minister of Health, who responded back, and I've just highlighted a few things here, where the response back was that peyote ceremonies were disgusting, that they were causing levels of laziness and despondency amongst these communities. And so what we want to do together, and why we come here as a trio, is to start pushing back against that archival record, and some of that archival record which continues to plague and promote a misunderstanding of the use of peyote, or the so-called importation of peyote. Yes, we are a different country for now, up north of the... Too soon? But before the bison disappeared, families moved around more fluidly and freely, and of course the peyote territory was not owned by, I can't even make a Trump joke. So this image represents our attempts now to come together, working with community. We have images from the past, some of whom, again, are some of Kelly's family. There are images of us coming together and learning through ceremony about how we can set the record in a better, more honest way about how we can think about different worldviews as we begin to unpack this history afresh. So I want to transition now. This was from a ceremony that I attended at the invitation of Kelly, and an image of his grandmother, who I found in Wisconsin archives. So she traveled too. And this is just an image from one of our last meetings where a group of us have gotten together. So we've got students from the university, we've got members from the community, and we're trying to learn together.
Good morning. My name is Reanna Daniels. I was not born into this way of life. I was raised with our traditional values and how we see the world, but also in Sundances. But I was actually married in. I won't tell you how old. It was very young. And so everything I learned about this way is through my husband and his family, his mom, his grandmother. And so they, I guess in a sense, raised me in this way. I've been with my husband since I was 15 years old, so that's why I said I wasn't going to tell you how old I was. So I'm kind of the bridge between the historical part, what's written, and and bridging into Kelly how it informs our life. So my part is more of the worldview, and that's what's missing from all of these pictures is our worldview, our understanding is, and again, and the other part of that is whatever's in the book is written by people and their agendas, there's policies, and they come from a certain approach and their intention behind the things that are said, that they're lazy and very unclean and whatever else you want to say, but that those are come from a different way. They have their own agendas, but also there's also a very different worldview. So one example is my daughter is in university right now, and she phoned us, and she said she's taken a feminist class, and so she was talking about asking, well, what about this? What about that? I said, the reasons women aren't allowed to do certain things in our ceremonies, we have creation stories, and they tell us why these are the way they are, and it has nothing to do with women are less or women aren't worthy. It has nothing to do with that. So again, that's a different set of worldview. And so once I told her that, she understood. I said, they don't understand. They don't know our creation stories and the reasonings behind it. Then you, from a different world, you could say, oh, we have to be equal. We should be able to do this. But that's, again, two worldviews. And so I'm not trying to offend anybody, but that's just an example of different worldviews. You see things differently in this. So what's missing from all these archives is our understanding. Our worldview tells us how to live. It tells us our values are inserted in there. It's tells us how to live, and it's not just something we have a ceremony and that's the only time you're humble or you're kind. These are things on how we have to choose our how we live our lives every single day. It gives us direction, and we use that direction to be able to make informed choices through our lives. And so that's what we do with our children, is we bring them up in these ways, and they learn those understandings in there, and then they themselves, when they're out in the world, then they can make good decisions for themselves based on our worldview and on our understanding of being kind, of being humble, of being respectful. So it's not just in one setting, it's how we carry ourselves throughout our life. And so another bridge through there is all the things that were said about the ceremony and this medicine, and that's how we understand it as is a medicine and not peyote. It's to us, it's just a medicine, and it informs us how we live our lives every single day. And so what was said in those kind of trickles down into, and that was the intention, is having Indigenous people not go that way. And so some of those misperceptions, even though a lot of these accounts, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, will continue those beliefs, negative beliefs, even though they've never stepped into a ceremony or attended one. So, you're talking, go ahead.
I'm a bit different. I need more than 8 minutes. Good morning, everyone. It's awesome to be here today amongst all of you wonderful people. I want to thank Erika and also my wife Reanna for being a part of this panel at this moment, for all the beautiful words that they had shared. Myself, my name's Kelly Daniels, as I was introduced. I'm very honored to be able to share just 7 minutes of a wide range of history and try to put it all some into just a few words here at this moment. I want to say the Native American Church was entitled for recognition to the land of Canada, the, I guess, country, so that it could carry on the practices of religious practices. And the word church came in place so that the outside people of the land could acknowledge that it's a religious ceremony. So the language was very important at this time in '53, and the pictures that you see here. Within those pictures is my mom in a green shirt, and the teepee on this side is in my yard. And then down there where the three of us is Erika and myself and this gentleman, that's in my yard. We had a ceremony. So when we talk about pilgrimage, it's very important. It becomes a ceremony because when we are done this pilgrimage, we are allowed to exercise our religious practices and the histories of ancestors, and songs are sung that are centuries old. Back in some of the, I'll say, date back into 1819. Some of those songs are still sung, and they're sharing. So when we make this pilgrimage, when you already said like Canada to, and Rio Grande, it's like for somebody like myself, it's not an easy task. So prayer is very important. Even just to coming here, we did our ceremonies, ways of prayer, and having respected elders to say prayers for us, so that way what we have to say can touch each and every one of you in a way of, I felt good of how they presented, and the presenters were also prayed for, and everyone else that was here for their safety. And all of this pilgrimage, it's an act of kindness, because you take the people that are intelligent and courage and brave enough to cross the whole central North America into northern Mexico. So prayers and tobaccos and peace offerings are all essential part of this pilgrimage. So coming here also to greet and meet all of you, we had put tobaccos down, and there was prayers said to the entities, and all around the holy heavenly body in the earth, so that we can encounter this and share our kindness and our stories in a way that the respect goes both ways, right? So all of this is done in a way of being in a pilgrimage. So when we get done this pilgrimage, say for instance here, the beautiful things that we gathered this morning just by the people sharing about their people, many of the things that they expressed is what we've been doing as a First Nations people, but in Canada, right? So we have people that pick medicines and have interactions with medicines, and with the medicine we call peyote, psychedelic, we don't just show up and take the medicine. So there's structures, there's principles, and there's sacred teachings that have to be followed. And the community of people have to acknowledge that person to be the one to pick that particular medicine. And it comes with knowledge, it comes with wisdom, it comes with teachings. And these people in this teepee, the man that's standing in the old archive picture is my grandpa. And when I was a child, he held me in that teepee and gave me a name that was named after the peyote. So those teachings, they don't dissolve. So it's very important that we make pilgrimages so a tradition, a religion can continue on, a practice, a way of life that is very old, it doesn't like disappear. So our pilgrimages are very sacred to us, and so that our teachings, one of the, how much time do I have? 2 more minutes? Okay, so one of the very, very important things that we have amongst my family there, but everybody else that we're representing within the Native American Church of Canada is one of the old teachings of the great spiritual being had left these teachings with our people. At once upon a time in the beginning of creations, my wife mentioned creation stories, and we have them. And they interline to almost everything in North America. There's nothing that, and then worldview around the world too. So we have our own educational system when we say creation stories and a way of life. And so one of the things is that is mentioned, and we also mention to our children, and I have grandchildren, and we're already starting to teach them, is that if we lose that, then we become a lost people, and we won't have anything to depend on. So it's very important to continue sharing and teaching. And the way that I've been taught by my people is that we share with everyone so that we're all on the same page. It brings unity and it brings community to all people. Is my time up? Okay. 30 seconds. So I'll just take this little time and say, I really enjoy seeing some of the grass over here, and we got to see some birds and listen. And needless to say, it's been a long winter in Canada, and you're very also lucky to have this kind of weather. And hopefully in the next few months, we'll get to enjoy birds again and see grass again. And thank you very much. One of the things that the Native American Church with the Peyote, the psychedelic, and we call medicine, is always the highest act of kindness, always using that kindness, no matter who the persons that you interact with. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. And the next presenter is Benjamin Feinberg, Professor of Anthropology at Warren Wilson College.
All right, thank you. If you're at this conference, you are already aware of the town of Huautla de Jimenez in Mexico and its association with psychedelic mushrooms, and its particularly central role in the origin myth of the arrival of psychedelic mushrooms to the United States. When I first went to Huautla, hiking up from the east in 1987, I was one of the few foreigners who arrived there without any knowledge of this. But I quickly learned, and I fell in love with the place for various reasons, and have come back repeatedly over the last many years as a cultural anthropologist, a friend, a compadre, and just a visitor. But let's get back to the story you know, which is the story of Maria Sabina, right? This young woman of 23, already a widow, a mother of 3 in the early 1910s, desperate to cure her horribly sick sister. And in her desperation, she consumes more than 30 pairs of derumbe mushrooms and has this vision, right, of 6 or 8 powerful male figures come to her behind a desk piled high with books and papers. And one of them says to her, "This is the book of wisdom. It is the book of language. Everything that is written in it is for you. Take it so you can work." And so this woman who cannot read or write takes it and reads. And she reads, "Cure yourself with the light of the moon." No, she doesn't say anything like this, right? Nothing at all. However, if you have Googled Maria Sabina in the last few years or seen a meme posted by some well-meaning acquaintance, this is what you've seen. You have seen her completely subsumed within the cliched tropes of self-focused Western wellness culture with not much concern about her own particular milieu. And these images are everywhere, drowning out her story with endlessly repeated images in English and in Spanish. of this sort of particular take. Now, what actually happened to her when she read that book is far more interesting, and I'm not really going to go into it, except to say that she kind of received her destiny of being a kind of privileged intermediary between her world and spaces of powerful others. And these powerful others she worked with, she argued with, she communicated with through this empowering language that she had access to. As a mediator, this was a position seen as shkon, or sacred, but implying power and danger. Going to spaces of powerful others is a place that can create shabasen, to use a word. It can also involve betrayal. It's similar to another emphasis on mediation and power in the Sierra Mazateca. The town of Huautla itself is positioned as the intermediary between the rest of the region and spaces of power in the outside world, particularly the dominant commercial bilingual class, the Chiota Shon, or people of paper, people of the book, are positioned as intermediaries with powerful others, whether they be the coffee industry and plantations in the 19th century, or the state, or something else. The Chiota Yoma, or humble people, people like Maria Sabina, also rely on them for that intermediation. And Maria Sabina kind of both mimics and appropriates elements of that mediation in her own work. She is not just sitting there drinking lavender tea and engaging in self-care. She is a bookwoman, a lawyer woman, using these symbols of power in a kind of, and mobility in a subversive way that reproduces how power is thought of in the region. So these are examples of what another presenter, Joshua Falcone, calls psychedelic assemblages, the ways in which the meaning of psychedelic experiences is tied up in context-bound specifics, but also the way it is bound up and productive of different kinds of social relationships. And so I'm gonna go through a quick sort of history of these different forms of mediation among mushroom encounters between people in the region and outside over the last, 70 or 80 years. So you're probably aware that Gordon Wasson, of course, this New York banker fascinated by mushrooms, came to the region in 1953 and then continued to come every year, interested in this knowledge and spreading it throughout the world. In 1957, he introduced the world to Maria Sabina in an article in the little-known obscure journal Life magazine. That same year, he visited and he brought his family and also a family friend named Oakes Plimpton, the scion of an elite patrician New England family. And he gave me his journal that he did for this period. So of course they were interested in this knowledge that typically was associated with Chiota Yoma cures like Maria Sabina, but they needed bilingual intermediaries in Huautla to help them through that. So as Maria Sabina is mediating between these earth lords and other forces of power that are spatialized in her region and represent her form of power, people from Huautla, in this case a woman named Erlinda Martinez Cid, was the mediator between Wasson and Maria Sabina. Now, in Oakes Plimpton's journal, he has this very droll patrician style that involves a kind of condescending criticism of almost every aspect of life. He finds mole an excruciating dish. It's not. He finds the liquor perfectly foul. He criticizes how people look and everything like that. So even the most sort of liberal people of the 50s just sort of assumed this discourse that their host could be framed within the idea of backwardness that requires outside help for them to progress from passiveness to citizenship. But at the same time then, when Oakes took mushrooms with Maria Sabina, he was impressed. He was blown away. He found this a pure, monumental experience, despite the disgusting aguardiente, which is good too. So his journal reminded me of the letters sent home by Hernan Cortés to the king from Yucatan. Similarly, Cortés described the people as having really ugly ornaments and decoration and so forth, But at the same time, there was something really valuable, a resource there that if somebody could take advantage of it would be really profitable in some ways. So here you see some similarities there. Now, going on, Wasson and Plimpton represented Maria Sabina in ways similar to the recently discovered Soiliacanth, a prehistoric fish that had been discovered alive in Madagascar. They referred to her as a kind of living fossil, ossified representation of the primordial moment when man discovered religion. But at the same time, they felt that this required outsiders, people with expertise, to understand and make sense of it, people of science. So they're operating, they think of Maria Sabina kind of as a living fossil that they need to make sense of, but they're also working through an intermediary who gives them access to the cure from this different social class, is a cultural guide who can prepare meals that don't require, like Wasson's wife refused to eat beans, chili, or tortillas. Also provided and bought up a ton of mushrooms to be sent to pharmaceutical labs until something could be identified from that. Now, people from her class were used to representing themselves through the signs of modernity and progress and differentiating themselves from their poorer neighbors. But here were these outsiders, these prestigious outsiders expressing this sort of interest in the culture of people like Maria Sabina. Erlinda, according to Plimpton's journal, dealt with that. She decided she would take the mushrooms as long as it was very clear that she was aligning herself with the scientific values of Wasson and not the kind of superstition of other folks. Whatever her motives, the child saints were not nice to her. She said they set her straight to hell. She vomited a lot and asked for lots of glasses of water. So after Wasson's visit, in the 1960s, you see many, many countercultural visitors coming to Huautla. And while many met different people, a bulk of them stayed at their own kind of encampment, where it was important to them that there be a legitimizing role for the particular place. But the place wasn't so much their interactions with particular people, but with their own liminal, vibrant countercultural community. So Huautla's intermediaries were to some degree kept out of that as they sought direct access to the mushrooms, and that didn't really work. So they were kicked out by the military. And when foreigners were allowed back in the 70s, a new pattern emerged, where specific households kind of within Huautla, for the most part, took over the whole sort of experience in a kind of in which foreigners stayed in households and consumed the mushrooms in the context of a ceremony. So in some ways, you see people from Huautla who had more intercultural fluency kind of taking over that process from less culturally fluent people like Maria Sabina. There was one woman in particular who aggressively marketed herself and was kind of a pioneer in this way, a woman named Julieta Casimiro, and she, as she told her daughter, it was frowned upon to give the child saints to foreigners. That is, we worked against our culture and ran the risk that comes with that. But this was sort of successful for her and her family, and she developed over time an international reputation that ultimately led to her, for example, joining a group called the 13 Indigenous Grandmothers and meeting the Dalai Lama, and so on. In terms of the representation, there were a couple of things. Outside in representations of Doña Julieta, increasingly she was represented through kind of generic tropes of kind of homogeneous indigenousness, kind of removed from the specifics of the area. Internally, she represented her place as a space of power similar to that of Maria Sabina. While Maria Sabina's house was kitty corner with that of Chicón Tocosho, the Earth Lord, Julieta's husband told me when the phone rang once in 1994, he said, people come to here from all over the world. I can communicate from this house with any government in Europe. This house has been a center of power for 600 years. So that kind of powerful shkon dealing with mysterious and yet powerful and dangerous outsiders here has kind of transformed some the relationship with the Chicones to those of we Chicones, we foreigners that she connects with in this way. So you see this pattern where there are many sort of cures who have exclusively kind of outsider clientele, and you have in other communities cures who continue to work exclusively with local clientele. A few people were able to bridge that, such as a man named Ricardo Rocha outside of Huautla in another village, who had both local and foreign visitors. And he kept a book like Maria Sabina, but it was a beautiful book, but it was filled with the signatures and locations and hometowns of the people who came to visit him. And so it, like Maria Sabina's form of travel, represented his space within this nexus of mediation and communication. So what about now? Now that we are in this town called the Psychedelic Renaissance, in which discussion of psychedelics has been moved out of corners and into the mainstream, what does this mean for these connections that take place within the Sierra Mazateca and within Huautla? Just in the last year, I've talked to several people from this next generation, people who are the relatives of some of these figures who hosted foreigners in the past. Ricardo Rocha's grandson, Julieta's son, and Maria Sabina's niece. And all sort of agreed, like, this isn't happening somewhere. People are not really coming to Huautla, at least to them, as much in this way. I was just walking through the woods and I encountered a man, and it turned out he was Ricardo Rocha's grandson, this man Andres, and he invited me to come visit him and spend time there. He had his grandfather's book, and there, in 1994, we found my name, which was pretty exciting. But he wanted to kind of continue in this relationship, but I noticed the book now, when I signed it last month, no one else had signed it for the last 2 years. And I said to him, you know, in my country now, psychologists are giving this stuff to people to treat them for their ailments. And he seemed a little befuddled. He said, but how can that be? The power comes from the earth, from here, from the earth lords, right? That same day, walking back to Huautla, I ran into a man who was the son of Julieta, who had died a couple years ago. And he was eager to see me. He wanted me to come visit him. He was unhappy because of, you know, people weren't coming anymore. His family had dissolved into fighting between the siblings over the inheritance. But he still, you know, and he was upset that people in the town really didn't respect them, despite his mother's international reputation. But he said he didn't have any mushrooms, but if I came to his house, he had a synthetic bottle made in Guadalajara. And unlike Andres, who said it's not the same, he said, oh, it is the same thing, believe me. So here are two different representations of the relationship between the particular space and the relationship between it. Now, the previous year, I had spent an afternoon and walked out to visit a friend of mine in the village of San Agustin, a couple hours walk from Huautla, to visit a friend of mine whose mother, Rosalia, was the niece of Maria Sabina, and really she's the spitting image of her famous aunt. Here she is holding a picture of the two of them. Now, this family, you know, was not particularly doing well. They were living on one son's income of about $8 a day in agricultural labor, did not even have coffee. They apologized, just offered me some atole. And this woman was dying. She was on her deathbed, and we still said goodbye. Now, at the same couple days later, I found another way that represented a kind of new way, perhaps, in the way in which people from Huautla were moving into the wider world. I had encountered an Israeli neuroscientist in a cafe who was looking to take these mushrooms she'd studied in an authentic context, but she had been disturbed by what she thought was the lack of authenticity in Julieta's children's house. And so what I had not been able to help her, but she sent me a message saying she'd discovered that there was a guy from Huautla with an education who was doing these ceremonies in San Miguel de Allende, an expat haven in another part of Mexico. And I found the website in English where she promised for anyone who could afford it, a magical Mexican mushroom journey. Peaceful surroundings. Instead of that diet of sexual abstinence and not eating beans, you have not only delicious foods, but organic farm-to-tail meals, shopping trips in a very safe luxury hotel. It announced its authenticity by saying that it was one of the curators was a Mazatec medicine man. So what this, as Maria Sabina's Chota Yoma niece lay dying in poverty in her village, wait, okay. I had not heard of this man, but this seemed like a shift in some of the dynamics of social classes in the Sierra, as some people make the move from being intermediaries between outsiders and people like Maria Sabina to directly usurping their role, erasing them in their mountain communities altogether in collaboration with foreign entrepreneurs. Who needs the Sierra or its confusing peasants and earth lords when it can be reduced to a commodified mobile tradition that can be packed into a suitcase and a handful of universalized tropes and sold to mobile tourists in the safety of a luxury boutique hotel? Here you see it denies and erases Maria Sabina's own subversive mobility through her chants, reducing her to something that is licensed by someone else. Now, the next year, all mention of this Huautla cure was scrubbed from the website, and it was replaced by just an idea of kind of generic shamans described as vaguely indigenous. And instead of Huautla having a sort of specific connection, it was Mexico in general that could be experienced in San Miguel de Allende. So Huautla becomes an idea used to license it intermediaries and experts outside of Huautla here. So that's just a sign of the indigenous with a mediated luxury vacation run by entrepreneur. At the same time, one of the competing factions of Maria Sabina's own descendants were promoting a holiday in honor of her birthday. And on the Facebook page devoted to that event, hoping to draw more tourists than a similar event, they posted a link of the shaman's image with the familiar phony meme, exalting their ancestor while simultaneously winking her out of existence in a self-replicating cycle of globalized sameness. So mushroom mediation had progressed. Maria Sabina claimed hidden negotiations with powerful others. Then the commercial class facilitated interactions between foreigners and curers. Some Huautla households then resumed that process, changing it for the benefit of visitors. And then eventually the psychedelic renaissance has largely removed the perceived need for actual real visits to Huautla, turning it into a symbol of a vague and nonspecific indigenousness, an origin myth for a tradition now controlled by international experts who can bring what they find important about Huautla, their version, to wherever is convenient and comfortable. But this is a very incomplete story, and I'm sure that there will always be more change. It's always partial, and the extraordinarily creative people of the Sierra will creatively adjust, as they always have, to new changes and new situations they're involved in. Thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you for that critical presentation, examining some of the colonial class dimensions on the mushroom encounters. And for the last presentation, we have Ligia Platero, who's going to be presenting virtually. And we're going to ask Ligia to help us keep track of time. Ligia is an education program associate for Chacruna.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here at Harvard University in this conference with you all today. My name is Ligia Platero. I am the Brazilian anthropologist based in Rio de Janeiro, and I am the Education Program Associate at Chacruna Institute. Since September 2024, I'm working at the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, IRI, from Chacruna, supporting the IRI's program coordinator, the Mazatec Osiris Cerqueda. I conclude my doctorate in cultural anthropology from the University of Rio de Janeiro in 2018. And I have been studying for the last 16 years on topics as a scholar, indigenous education, interethnic relations interculturality, ayahuasca, forest medicine, shamanic tourism, and indigenous rights. My PhD looked at the cultural reinventions, transformations, and exchanges amid the alliance between the Yawanawa indigenous people from Acre, Brazil, and an urban church of Santo Daime. In this sense, I research alliances, intercultural relations, and working misunderstandings in contemporary shamanic networks involving the Yawanawa people, Santo Daime, and other neo-shamanic churches. The title of my presentation is Indigenous Reciprocity Amid Contemporary International Shamanic Networks. I have here three goals. The first one is to understand what has been called indigenous reciprocity in the field of psychedelic movement in Global North in the last few years. My second goal is to understand how this concept resonates in the interethnic alliances between indigenous and non-indigenous people in the context of international shamanic networks related to indigenous groups from Acre, Brazil, highlighting the Yawanawa indigenous people and the production of alliances in the context of ayahuasca shamanism. My third goal is to discuss some limits and ethical concerns about the so-called indigenous reciprocity. For this presentation, I used data from my doctoral fieldwork in 2015 and 2016, and my methodology involved participant observation at the Shamanic Tourism Festival in Rio Gregório Indigenous Land, home to the Yawanawa people in Acre. Additionally, I conducted fieldwork at Santo Daime Church in Rio de Janeiro, and to complement this research, I incorporated new data from two recent interviews with urban allies from Brazil, along with new information gathered from Instagram. So, step one, looking for a definition of indigenous reciprocity. In the context of psychedelic movement in Global North, when we are talking about indigenous reciprocity, some ideas come to our minds. Indigenous knowledge from Global South were expropriated in the past by scientists and were used in the psychedelic science in Global North. In that sense, colonialism and cultural appropriation are bad roots of psychedelic movement. A second argument in the construction of this concept is that everyone in the psychedelic field should take serious indigenous knowledge and ontologies. There is a claim for intercultural dialogues that honor indigenous people and not just expropriate their knowledge. In other words, indigenous reciprocity is related to intercultural dialogues of knowledge between Western science and traditional knowledge in the psychedelic field, in dialogues involving all the Americas and between the Global North and Global South. A third aspect in the discussion is that everyone in the psychedelic field, including scientists, therapists, investors, companies, and consumers of psychedelics, should share benefits with indigenous groups in the Americas. In this sense, indigenous reciprocity can also be seen as respecting international treaties, as the Nagoya Protocol from 2010, and the Diversity Biology Convention related to indigenous intellectual property and genetic knowledge. In one hand, indigenous reciprocity in practice can be seen just as giving money to indigenous groups, just as philanthropic actions from different actors in the psychedelic field. On the other hand, other more complex understanding is that indigenous reciprocity can be seen as a dialogue between Western knowledge and indigenous knowledge and sharing economic benefits because of these exchanges. Reciprocity involves giving and receiving in relations between humans and plants, humans and non-humans, humans and spirits, the forests, mountains, and other beings with agency. In this case, anthropologists as Bialabati and Joseph Mays argues that indigenous reciprocity means to participate in these reciprocal relations that involves also more than humans. In this way, some people can feel that they should indigenize themselves, becoming indigenous in some way, trying to share these other ways of seeing and comprehend the world. This indigenization from actors in the psychedelic field can produce more conflicts because of accusations of cultural appropriation. This philanthropic work also can be criticized as another phase of colonialism, and everyone is invited to decolonize themselves, which means basically to make a self-examination and to not have colonial practices. In other words, indigenous reciprocity is taken by actors in NGOs in this field as decolonized philanthropy. Step 2, I'll talk about the international shamanic networks and shamanic tourism in Acre, in Brazil. I argue here in this presentation that another aspect of the indigenous reciprocity is the production of alliances. It's related to the production of partnerships, friendship, and kinship, symbolic and effective. As I could see in my PhD research, these intercultural alliances are constructed in interethnic rituals with the collective consumption of ayahuasca and the forest medicines as rapé, cambo, and sananca, for example, in South America. In the Yawanawa point of view, the consumption of medicines in group produce similar bodies, producing symbolic kinship as brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, or good fathers or good mothers, and social situations to produce effective kinship through marriage. Many of these alliances and partnerships are created in the cities, in neo-shamanic centers, in Santo Daime churches in Brazil, or in the context of shamanic tourism in indigenous lands. How alliances in contemporary shamanic networks can be considered as a way of producing indigenous reciprocity, as a way of fighting for indigenous sustainability and rights. I argue here that indigenous reciprocity is not present just in relations between actors from global north and global south. Indigenous reciprocity also can be constructed between south-south relations and intercultural relations between indigenous and non-indigenous people in Brazil and inside Latin America. Since the 2000s, indigenous people from Acre state began to visit ayahuasca centers in the cities and began a process of making kinship and intercultural alliances with people interested in their rituals. The Runiquim, Yawanawa, and Ashaninka indigenous people were pioneers in the cities in these ayahuasca circuits and networks. From 2010, they began to receive non-indigenous tourists in their lands to participate in ayahuasca rituals. These constructions of intercultural relations and dialogues with people from the cities, as people from Santo Daime Church, were important in some process of revitalizing their traditions and cultures, risking the uses of ayahuasca and other forest medicines. Since 2010, shamanic tourism for the Yawanawa indigenous people had become one of the most important economic activities for them. The number of festivals of shamanic tourism in Acre increased a lot. People from global north travel for these indigenous festivals, seeking indigenous knowledge with the intent of transform their lives, connect with nature, protect the forest, and having more knowledge for their work on psychedelic assisted therapy. Indigenous from Acre have been traveling to countries from global north for realizing rituals and looking for more economic allies. So, some dimensions of the indigenous reciprocity. In this scenario of the international contemporary shamanic networks, reciprocity has been made by the construction of intercultural global alliances. In these dialogues and exchanges of knowledge, the communication generally has its misunderstandings, including what is considered indigenous reciprocity. In one hand, when the allies are foreigners, generally these relations of exchange involve philanthropy coming from global north to indigenous people from global south as donations in money. People from global north are impacted for ceremonial experiences with ayahuasca and forest medicines, and when they have the possibility, some of them make donations of money for indigenous people. Foreigners also can create NGOs in countries from global north and advocate for indigenous rights for sharing benefits in the psychedelic space with the indigenous groups. On the other hand, allies from Brazil generally don't donate money for indigenous people in these alliances. Brazilian allies generally try to contribute and reciprocate with indigenous people by working to them in different instances. Most of the allies in Brazil don't see themselves as philanthropists, but people that work for a cause that is preserving indigenous culture and the forests. Many of them professionalize themselves in this field, working in NGOs or creating economic projects that seek to contribute with indigenous communities. Some of these allies can create a store for selling indigenous crafts and sharing benefits. They can help indigenous people to go to the global north to make rituals, therefore making more allies. They can help indigenous women in the production of and selling their art and becoming more autonomous. They can create water wells in indigenous villages, for example. Many of them also can work for indigenous causes through shamanic tourism and ayahuasca centers in the cities. In this sense, indigenous reciprocity is understood by these non-indigenous Brazilian allies as a way of life, a professionalization. Being allies for these people is giving back to knowledge that they received at ceremonial contests through professional work and engagement, and not just by donating money. They act reciprocally because they are inserted in the indigenous networks of exchanges by participating in ayahuasca ceremonies in the cities and in the indigenous villages. In Brazil, just few rich people from the psychedelic field donate money to indigenous groups, as is the case of the DJ Alok, that is a philanthropist for the Yawanawa indigenous group. So step 3, ethical limits and concerns. What are the ethical limits for indigenous reciprocity related to alliances created in shamanic networks? In these intercultural alliances, allies can be accused of using the image of indigenous people and appropriating indigenous cultures to get profits. Some researchers, such as Daniela Paluzzo, argue that shamanic tourism and these interethnic partnerships in the context of Peru generally are colonialists and Western owners from spiritual centers use indigenous shamans to get money from non-indigenous from the global north. When we compare briefly shamanic tourism in Brazil and Peru, we note that in Brazil, there are a lot of ayahuasca centers led by indigenous and not foreigners or Brazilians non-indigenous. In this scenario, indigenous people have more control over the prices and who will receive the benefits from these rituals. Otherwise, it is also possible to find urban neo-shamanic groups where Brazilian non-indigenous are the leaders. At the last ayahuasca indigenous conference that happened in the Yawanawa indigenous land in January 2025, some of their ethical concerns were about patents of ayahuasca in global north and indigenous rights related to intellectual property and genetic resources. They also mentioned concerns about allies from Brazil and other countries that learn with them and sell rituals and art as if they were indigenous people. So as we see, there is a thin line between reciprocity and cultural appropriation. Some conclusions. As the coordinator of the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative, Osiris Cerqueta states, indigenous reciprocity is a historical process and it's already under construction. I can add that indigenous reciprocity is experienced differently depending on cultural and historical process in each country. On one hand, indigenous reciprocity is a way to rebalance unequal and hierarchical relations between the global north and global south. On the other hand, indigenous reciprocity is also related to allyship between indigenous groups and actors inside their own countries. There are a lot of ethical concerns in all these relations. When indigenous reciprocity is seen as donations to indigenous people, it's very important to understand some inner conflicts amid these groups, because these big donations in some circumstances can increase problems in the indigenous communities, such as alcoholism and domestic violence. When non-Indigenous allies practice Indigenous reciprocity as a profession and a way of life, it also has concerns about crossing lines related to cultural appropriation and not sharing the benefits properly. Thank you so much for the opportunity of being here with you in this space today. And if you can, please donate to IRI, the Indigenous Reciprocity Initiative of Americas. Thank you so much.
cswr.hds.harvard.edu, copyright 2025, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.